So please welcome Dr. Adenitire.
Thank you, JC, for that kind introduction. And can I say it's a great privilege to be here. I'm often in Conway Hall for other purposes. I confess that I'm not only an academic, I'm also a salsa dancer. And the room next door is often used for a salsa social, and I'm also a salsa teacher, and I do a lot of that. But hey, so it's great to have this space where two or more of my interests intersect. But I promise you there will be no dancing today. Yes, it will just be talking. So my talk today is entitled "Religion as Liberal Politics," and the idea behind it is to understand what is religion. So JC started this talk, this presentation by talking about the beliefs that define humanists. And we find that when we look at other associations, other groups, other traditions, they also define themselves by their beliefs. And I will show in this talk that religious institutions, as understood by the law, and I will say more about that, are known, or are thought to be known, by the fact that they are institutions or corporations, associations that deal with particular kinds of beliefs. Yes, beliefs about cogent matters, supernatural matters. But we shall say that, I shall say a bit more about that. So the primary question of this talk is really about what is religion in law, yes? And how the courts define religion in law. I shall say a little about that. I shall look at the law of the UK, of the US, and Canada very briefly, so it's not going to be a legal lecture as such. Because really my interest is not to say what religion is. My main thesis that I will explore over the next few minutes is to say that there's no persuasive distinction between the religious and the non-religious, at least in law. Yes, so I'm a legal scholar. I cannot claim competence for all the domains of inquiry, maybe a little bit of philosophical inquiry, but my main domain in law. And my view is that the conception of religion as a belief system that courts have endorsed is not persuasive, and especially does not persuasively distinguish the religious from the non-religious. Not only that, I think the second part of my thesis is that the conception of religion as belief system is political. In fact, the thesis is more general. The idea is that definitions of religion in law, and a little bit outside the law, I shall say a little bit about that with much caution, fulfill a political purpose. They fulfill a political purpose and are animated by certain political goals. Yes, political not in terms of conservative, Greens, Labour, etc., but political in the sense of the deep ideological commitments that states are committed to. So I will talk about two ideological commitments. Liberalism as the chief Western ideology. Yes, a commitment to individual freedom and a commitment to the fact that political power has to be justified by reference to some sort of popular consent. And the other ideology I will talk about, which is very relevant, is what I call theistic politics. Theistic politics is a form of politics that puts center stage the will, the wishes, the desire of divinities, yes, of a god or gods. And these political conceptions, these big political ideologies, liberalism on the one hand and theistic politics on the other, animate our definition, not only ours, our definitions of religion in law. And elsewhere as well. So really, in order to understand religion, or the ways in which people understand what religion is or define religion, we need to understand the political background to which they belong. So that's what I will do. I will look at the political background, of course, of Western courts. As I said, I'll be looking at the UK, Canada, and US very briefly. But I will also venture back in time. I will look at some of the definitions in Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, and Roger Williams, who was a US colonist. And I shall look to the East. I shall look to the contemporary East, to the tradition, constitutional tradition in Egypt and Iran, again, very briefly, to understand how the political context, the commitments to either liberalism or political theistic politics informs legal definitions of religion. Okay, that's my roadmap. Hopefully now I can start the substantive talk in the next 25 minutes or so. Okay, so let's start with the truism, something that should be obvious, that what counts as religious in law matters a great deal. Yes? So let me give you some examples. So if you're religious, you may get certain benefits that others are not entitled to in law. So during the US Prohibition era, when the sale of alcohol was illegal, alcohol that was used for religious purposes was not criminalized. Yes, was lawful, could be lawfully sold. So counting as religious gave a certain benefit to wine. A religious wine was fine, non-religious wine, not so much. Okay, and there are other kinds of ways in which counting as religion in law matters. So say that you can register as a charitable organization in certain jurisdictions if you convince a charity commission that you're religious enough. And not all charities are able to satisfy this requirement. Other examples are you can get lots of tax breaks. So in Canada, for example, religious charities are exempt from from federal tax law. So clearly, counting as religious in law matters a great deal. Yes. So you would think that because it matters a great deal, the law would have a really persuasive answer as to what is religious. Not just persuasive in the sense that it's internally coherent, but that it also lives up to a demanding level of scrutiny. But I shall argue that this is not the case. That the idea of religion as a distinct reality, distinct from the non-religious, is not so persuasive. Okay, so let's start with this little overview of what counts as religious in the law of some of the jurisdictions I have mentioned. So let's start with the U.S. U.S., of course, is a federal state. Different states define religion in different ways. Federal level, the state level. It's a bit of if I can say so, a bit of a mess. There's a bit of a confusion there. But one of the prevailing definitions, I think, is very telling. Yes. So take the case in the Third Circuit of the Federal Courts, U.S. District Court, Circuit Court, Third District, where in the case of I'll call it the Africa case, because that's the name of the complainant. In the Africa case, an individual called Africa, Mr. Africa, deemed himself to be a religious minister of an organization called MOVE. And MOVE is a movement, excuse the pun, that is dedicated to moving things, to a living philosophy, to a pacifist philosophy, to a philosophy of energy, of movement and world peace and anti-violence. Yes, that's how they describe themselves, and they also describe themselves as religious. The courts didn't buy this at all. They said, this is not a religion. And how did they determine this? Well, they gave us some criteria as to what has to count as religion. And again, I emphasize that this definition of religion is particular to a particular section of the US. So the judges in the Africa case said that first, a religion addresses fundamental and ultimate questions having to do with deep and imponderable matters. Second, a religion is comprehensive in nature. It consists of a belief system as opposed to an isolated teaching. And third, a religion often can be recognized by the presence of certain formal and external signs, such as prayers, institutions like ministers, holy text, things that we are familiar with if we take Christianity, for example, as a paradigm of religion. So anything basically that looks a little bit like Christianity is a religion for the purposes of the law in this US. But let's dig a bit deeper. So this judgment tells us that religion is first and foremost a system of belief. Yes, a system of belief that deals with deep existential questions, yes? Questions we don't have ready answers to. And that it's comprehensive, and then, ultimately, that it has certain objective features like a prayer book, ministers, etc., etc. Notice that this definition of religion, and this is very important because we will see this consistent in legal opinions in a liberal context, does not require a religion to involve belief in a deity, in a God, yes, in a divinity. So you can have an atheistic religion, a non-theistic religion, an agnostic religion, which, to my surprise, when I was first encountering this, seems to be very counterintuitive. But actually, this is what the law of several jurisdictions, including the UK, find. So one issue that was at play in one of the cases involving Scientology in the UK was whether it was a religion. And there was debate as to whether it could count as a religion because it wasn't clear that there was a belief in a divinity. And the UK courts asserted that religion, again, is a matter of belief, a belief in issues that involved imponderable questions, deep questions, existential questions. I'll just use existential as a shortcut. And that it is a system of belief of a spiritual nature. And we're only told what spiritual means by contrasting it with non-spiritual. Yes? So if it's religious, it's spiritual. If it's spiritual, it is non-spiritual. And is religious is distinct from secular. That's all we're given. And of course, as I said, is a belief system that has to do with existential concerns. And it may or may not have external signs such as churches, ministers, creeds, Bibles, etc. So this, we find that in the decision, as I was referring to, the Africa decision, the Scientology decision, in the US, in Canada, in a case, in Amsterdam case, a case involving the setting up of Sukkot for Jewish practitioners. The Canadian Supreme Court reiterated basically the same thing that the other US and UK courts have been reiterating, that a religion is really about beliefs, is about beliefs in something, in existential matters, and it is a subjective system of belief. Yes? Okay, so basically, the features of religion in this Western court, what is a religion or what counts as religion in this Western court, I will repeat it, is a system of belief that deals with existential matters. And this system of belief need not need not be theistic, yes, need not involve a belief in God, perhaps counterintuitively. Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll see. It seems that if this is religion, yes, then we are sorted. We have finished the lecture, we know what religion is, we can move on, yes? It seems to be something persuasive, especially if we compare this with something that is standardly thought of as religious, such as Christianity. It's a system of belief, you would think, deals with existential matters. Yes, it is theistic, need not be, but existential matters are such as where do we come from, where are we going, is there life after death, is there not? All of that seems to be a good definition. It captures the intuition of a paradigmatic tradition that we commonly call religious. Yet, I want to suggest that this idea of religion as a distinct reality, as something that can be separated from the non-religious, is not actually very persuasive at all. Well, it's not persuasive first for two reasons. One is that this conception of religion as belief system is the product of a particular political era. It's not a universal concept. So the term religio, or religio, the Latin term from which religion derives, never really stood for a system of beliefs as we have it today. It is from the 16th century onwards, as several religious studies scholars have documented, that this idea of religion as belief started. So it's not a universal concept at all. The Latin term stood for a variety of concepts, such as virtue, rites of worship towards deities, but also humans, taking care of the elderly, of those that are fragile, a system of moral scruples, conscience, and so forth and so on and so forth. The idea of religion as a belief system was really crystallized first as a Western concept, second as a concept that derives from the schism in Christendom, yes? So when the reformers, John Calvin, Martin Luther, were trying to reform Catholicism, yes, Christianity, what they really pressed on, among other things, was that individuals should be familiar with the basic doctrines of their beliefs, let's say, of their belief systems, yes? So if one was a Lutheran, a Calvinist, etc., they should know what you believe in. So JC started this talk by highlighting the central belief systems of humanists, and other traditions have done similar things. So there's a credo, the Nicene Creed, and several other propositions. So religion as a belief system started historically based on this insistence by reformers that people ought to know what they believed in, yes? So the catechism was actually a product of a response to this reformist movement, yes? Putting into book form the central belief systems, the central creeds, the central doctrines, was a response to this challenge by the reformers to Catholicism during the Reformation. So what does this tell us about religion, especially as a religion understood as Western courts understand it, as a belief system? Well, it tells us that it's really the product of a particular historical struggle, of a particular political struggle between factions of Christendom that then universalized across the globe when European colonialists went all over the world, subdued nations, subjugated them, and they found in others what they had created in Europe. So in Europe, they had created the idea of belief systems, yes, that were nicely divided by their doctrines, and belief systems that dealt with imponderable matters like where are we from, who made us, where are we going, is there life after death, all of these existential things. And then they went elsewhere, they went to India, they went to Africa, and they found other belief systems, yes, Hinduism being one of them, let's say, Buddhism being another, etc., Confucianism, etc. I could name them all, but I won't. Yes, that also dealt with existential concerns, belief systems, and so they projected the disunity that they had in Christendom, yes, European Christendom, to other traditions. So that's how religion as a belief system was historically created, as a way of projecting this insistence that Christians knew what they believe in, and projecting that insistence onto other cultures, onto other traditions. So this tells us a little bit about how fragile the concept of religion is. It's fragile because it is historical. If it's historical, then it's contingent. Then we could have other conceptions of religion. If religion has a history, or better, if religion as belief has a history, then courts are on shaky grounds when they insist that they have a very persuasive distinction between the religious and the non-religious. And I can tell you a little bit more why this is not persuasive. It's not only the fact that religion as a belief system is historically situated, yes, as a historical origin. It's not a universal idea, okay? The problem is that this idea of religion as a belief system is also inconsistent. It doesn't help us categorize things neatly. So take the practice of human rights, yes? My view is that there is nothing in law that resembles or that ticks all the boxes of religiosity as much as the practice of human rights does. Remember what those boxes are. First, religion is a belief system. Yes, it's a belief system that deals with existential matters. But so is human rights law. Yes, human rights is a doctrine or is a practice that is centered around certain doctrines. So if you look at the Universal Declaration, Section 1, it says something like humans are all equal and in dignity and rights, and they should behave towards each other in a spirit of brotherhood. I'm paraphrasing, something along these lines, yes? This is the central doctrine of human rights. Another doctrine is that humans are free, they are born free, they are equal, that they have inherent dignity. Now, these doctrines, this belief system are held in a spiritual way also, because they are not provable by science. These are not you cannot prove it through senses, the dignity of humanity. You can't prove it through senses. You cannot smell dignity. You cannot touch dignity. It's a political conception. It's an ideological commitment, almost supernatural. Of course, we have moral philosophical justifications of human rights. But that's beside the point, because we also have moral justifications for many so-called religious traditions, including Christianity, etc., etc. So what's my point? My point is that traditions that look like religious, such as the practice of human rights, are nevertheless not considered in law religion. Yes? Why so? Because, and this is a central thesis of mine, because they do not fulfill the political functions that what courts have tradition and classified as religions serve. And what are these political functions? I will say a little bit more about that. And essentially, it is Western courts attribute a particular political functions to religion And we can understand that by putting it in conversation with theistic politics. Religion, as understood by court, is a matter of individual conscience, individual choice, is a individual thing. It is not a thing that the state ought to coerce individuals into. Yes? So we have doctrines of freedom of religion that bar the state from coercing people to subscribe to any particular ideology, especially a theistic one. In the US, for example, we'll have ideas of non-establishment that dictate that the state cannot endorse a particular theistic tradition. I cannot establish it. There cannot be a state church, for example. Of course, we don't have the same constitutional view here in the United Kingdom. So what the political function of religion does is to set religion as something that is outside the jurisdiction of the state. Yes. So categorizing religion as a belief system protects the state and citizens from imposing upon each other, either the state imposing on citizens or citizens imposing upon each other, the worship of a particular deity. Okay? And this conforms to a particular tradition, a liberal understanding of individual freedom. And this could be otherwise. And this is very important, that our commitment to define religion in terms of belief system, of an optional system that individuals are free to subscribe to, is not a given. There are other jurisdictions where this is not true. So there are other jurisdictions in the Western past, okay? And I don't think I have time to cover those. But there are also jurisdictions in our contemporary time, that actually make reference to religion in a way that is no longer optional. So let's take the constitutional tradition of Iran and Egypt. Yes, we are moving away from a liberal ideology. Yes, where the individual is at the center, where the individual is free to pursue different conceptions of the good life, whether they are theistic, whether they are non-theistic, atheistic, unconcerned, etc. In other traditions that I label theistic politics, that choice, religion, is no longer considered an optional belief system. Yes, it is considered, in the paper, I term it as a matter of fixed identity. Okay, so take the constitutional tradition of Iran and Egypt. In their constitutions, there are respectively 3 and 4 religions. Okay, only 3 and 4. Islam, of course, being the majority religion. And even Islam, in these constitutions, the various factions of Islam are not understood as religions. Yes, they are understood as different schools of interpretation of the religion of Islam. Of course, from what I was saying, this is not the same that we have in Christendom. Yes, there were different kinds of religions even within Christendom. So there was a Catholic religion, there's the Protestant religion, and now there's the Methodist religion, there's the Mormon religion, there's this and that. But in constitutional systems like Iran and Egypt that are not committed to liberalism, to option, that you can move freely between different belief systems, religion is not understood as a belief system. It is understood as a matter of fixed identity. You are born in a particular religion, and if you're born into Islam, you are not free as a matter of law, whether Sharia or whether state law, to move freely to another religion. In your document, you are considered to be a a Muslim. Of course, if you are a non-Muslim, it is possible for you to convert into Islam. Okay? But the constitutional tradition and the definition of religion in this jurisdiction trap individuals within the majority religion, which in this case is in Islam. And why is this so? It is so because they are committed to a form of politics in which a divinity, the will or the supposed will of the divinity is definitive, yes? But this is not so, as I've argued, in liberal jurisdictions. Okay, so in the paper I do other things. I also look at where, historically speaking, our conception of religion as belief system originates from. And I track that to this weird man. It was a US man, Roger Williams. Yes, he is the architect of the colony of Rhode Island. Yes, architect in a metaphorical way. He established that colony. He was the governor, and he lived to establish the first, or one of the first known, declarations of religious freedom. And why is this important? Because the idea of because he championed what I term religion as conscience. The fact that religion is a internal disposition of the mind concerning God, yes? Which is a little similar, but also fundamentally different, but a little similar to the Western conceptions that UK, US, and Canadian courts have. Yes, remember the US, UK, and Canadian courts do not require something to be theistic, yes, to involve a belief in God in order to be classified as religion. But Roger Williams insisted that religion is really a matter of conscience, individual conscience, of belief, but that involve belief in God. But Roger Williams was an early liberal, yes, and he believed, by contrast to other Western thinkers such as Aquinas, that everyone could have a religion because everyone had conscience. And conscience was to be found in the Indians, in the Africans, in the colonists, in the colonialists, everywhere, yes? This was different from Thomas Aquinas' conception, who understood religion to be basically Christianity. Yes, worship of the Christian God. Now, this is not too dissimilar, in my view, from the conception that Egyptian courts and Iranian courts have today. Okay, and I make reference to Aquinas just because he's one of the leading figures in Western political, theological, and cultural thought. That this idea of religion, or this idea of theistic politics, where divinities are at the center of stage, is not just something that we can lament in so-called non-liberal states, yes, non-Western states. It is part of the Western tradition, and it's only through the advent of liberalism that we see in Roger Williams that the conception of religion moves from a theistic one that puts the divinity to the center, to a matter of belief, a matter of conscience. And so Western courts owe a lot to religion as conscience that Roger Williams argued for. So I'm getting towards the end of my talk, and I just want to reflect further on why Western courts do not include theism as a necessary ingredient for religion. Yes. Why can you count as religion in law even though you do not believe in God? Yes, as most people, if you ask the man on the street, what is a religion, they will say, oh, a system of belief that involves God. But if they go in front of a court in the US, in the UK, in Canada, they'll be told, no, there's no necessary ingredient. And if what I've been saying so far is correct, the key to answering these questions is the political stance of those jurisdictions. Yes, is the politics of liberalism that justifies and that pushes this court to take theism out as a necessary ingredient. In particular, the liberal commitment to pluralism. Yes, we live in a plural society, and we like living in a liberal society, in a plural society. We like having different people, having different conceptions of the good. That is itself the central commitment of liberalism. Liberalism is a solution to pluralism. So pluralism is central, is a natural bedfellow, in my view, to liberalism. But if liberalism and pluralism are intimately linked, then it follows that if we exclude from legal protections traditions that self-label themselves religious but do not have did not have theism as part of the essential beliefs, then we may discriminate against them. And this is exactly what courts tell us. They refuse to put theism as central to the legal category of religion because they are afraid to exclude Confucianism, certain branches of Buddhism, and certain esoteric, let's put it that way, traditions that do not have divinities as a fulcrum of their creeds. So what am I saying? I'm saying that a commitment to liberalism, and with it a commitment to pluralism, explains why Western courts, liberal courts, yes, or Western courts or courts in liberal states, consistently refuse to require a religious to be theistic in order to count as religion in law. So what? I think. So what? Is this just a relatively nice, historically informed analysis of contemporary conceptions of religion in law? Yes and no. Yes, because it's important to understand where our conceptions come from. Yes, because it's important to understand why where courts have taken their views of religion as a belief system, where they have taken it from. But more importantly, in my view, it tells us that religion as a concept, at least in law, and perhaps even elsewhere, is a fragile concept. Is a concept that rests on the fragile wings of politics. Yes, it's not the fragile wings of contemporary politics. Yes, not contemporary politics in the sense of, as I said, conservative, green, labor, etc. It rests on the fragile wings of history, of our commitment to liberalism, or, on the other hand, our commitment to theistic politics. So, if religion is such a fragile concept, and if central practices in our life, at least in our civic life, like human rights law, could plausibly count as a religion, but they don't, then it seems that this legal classification of something as religion is really fragile. Yes, and eventually, and this is the work that I'm trying to progress, maybe we are better off without a legal category of religion, without such a fragile concept that was only invented about 400 to 500 years ago. Yes, and that even today, in different political contexts, has a different meaning. Maybe what we need is to move beyond the legal category of religion, because the work that religion does in law is a contingent one. There are other legal categories that may fulfill the same purpose. For example, religious freedom entails, in many jurisdictions, freedom of association, freedom for people of like-minded ideas to associate together, go to church, preach their doctrines. But this same freedom is covered under freedom of association. We enjoy this freedom right now by being together, talking about what we think about religion. You are listening to me, and the freedom that, for example, preachers have, yes, to spout their ideologies about, the body of Christ or Muhammad or whatever, is also protected by this idea of freedom of speech. Yes, the same freedom that I'm exercising right now, and you are hopefully in some way benefiting from by listening to my speech. So if preachers are covered by freedom of speech, then they need not freedom of religion. So the same things that freedom of religion or religion in general is doing in law can be covered, and this will need further substantiation, by other legal categories. So because religion is such a fragile concept in law, maybe we better move to other, more resistant categories in the future. Okay, that's that. Thank you very much for listening.